As Paddington settled himself down in Mr. Heinz's consulting room, he decided he liked hospitals. He was just about to nod off when the door opened. "Ah, there you are," said Mr. Heinz. "I'm glad to see we're all ready. We're going to play a little game together. It's to test your reactions. I'm going to call out some words, and I want you to give me another word with the opposite meaning, right?" "Wrong," said Paddington promptly. Mr. Heinz glared at him. "Wait until I give you the go-ahead. Now, 1, 2, 3, go." "Stop," said Paddington. Very good," said Mr. Heinz. "Very bad," said Paddington eagerly. "Now, look here." "Look there," cried Paddington. He broke off and gazed at the doctor. "Can't you think of any more words, Mr. Heinz?" he asked. Mr. Heinz decided to have one more go. "White," he said, more in hope than in anger. "Black," said Paddington. "Big." "Small." "Fast." "Slow." "Fine." "Wet." Mr. Heinz began to look better pleased. "Well," he said, "we've nearly finished." "We've only just started," cried Paddington. "No, we haven't." "Yes, we have." "No, no, no!" "Yes, yes, yes!" "Will you stop?" yelled Mr. Heinz. "No, I won't," cried Paddington, falling off the couch in his excitement. "To think, my first failure in 40 years, a pear. I should have my head examined." As the door slammed shut, Paddington looked most surprised. He'd been in the hospital for ages, and he was still no nearer seeing Mr. Curry, let alone having his hat removed. "I think," he announced to the world in general, "if I ever get my hat stuck on again, I shall use a shoehorn. It's much easier than seeing a doctor, especially when you're hungry." One day, Mr. Gruber took Paddington on an outing to an auction sale. He bought a catalogue of the items to be sold and then found a seat near the front so that they would have a good view of all that went on. Paddington decided straight away that he liked auction sales. It was all very friendly. In fact, he hardly had time to sit down before someone waved. So he waved back. Then another man waved. So he waved at him too, and then raised his hat several more times for good measure. £4 on bid. £5 over there. "Going," called the auctioneer, pointing at Paddington. "Going, going, gone." "But I've only just got here," exclaimed Paddington. "Don't worry," said Mr. Gruber. "That's the auctioneer. He's just sold something." Paddington gave the man a hard stare. "I hope it's not that table," he exclaimed. "It must be full of dents by now." "Lot 65, 1 carpentry set, sold to the young bear with the sandwiches for £5. £5? exclaimed Paddington. "For a carpentry set? But I've only got 10p." Mr. Gruber reached for his wallet. "I expect it was because you waved, Mr. Brown," he whispered. "You see, if you nod your head or even scratch your nose at an auction sale, they often think it's a sign you're interested." Paddington sat very still, hardly daring to breathe, let alone nibble his sandwich, in case he bought something else by mistake. "What am I bid for this old highwayman's pistol?" called the auctioneer. "Once the property of Dick Turpin." "I think I might try for that," whispered Mr. Gruber. "I've been after one for ages." "Come along, who's going to start the bidding?" £10, called someone at the back of the hall. 11, called Mr. Gruber. 12, shouted the other man. "Oh, dear," said Mr. Gruber. "I hope I don't lose it, Mr. Brown. £13. 14, shouted Paddington. "Any advance on £14? 15, shouted Paddington wildly. £15, called the auctioneer. Going, going, gone. Sold to the young bear gentleman on my right." Mr. Gruber began to feel that perhaps taking Paddington to an auction sale wasn't such a good thing after all. "Perhaps I'd better not do any more bidding, Mr. Gruber," began Paddington. "I don't think bears are very good at it." "Lot 67, a very unusual marmalade stand." Paddington hastily changed his mind. "I'd like one of those," he exclaimed excitedly. "Mrs. Bird's always grumbling because my jars get sticky." "What am I bid for this fine piece of antique silver?" "Fivepence," cried Paddington excitedly. "Fivepence," repeated the auctioneer. "Did I hear someone say fivepence?" "Sixpence," said Paddington. "If you ask me," said a voice, "that young bear knows something we don't." "Perhaps it's a fake," said another. "No one would bid sixpence if it were a real silver stand." "Going," said the auctioneer desperately. "Is that all I'm bid? Will no one make an advance on sixpence? Going, gone." "And a very good buy indeed, Mr. Brown," said Mr. Gruber later that day. "It more than makes up for the money we lost on your carpentry set and the pistol." "It more than makes up for missing our 11s too, Mr. Gruber," said Paddington happily. "Besides, I think marmalade tastes even better when it comes out of an antique, especially when it's a sixpenny one." One day, Mr. Brown arranged to take everyone out to lunch at a new restaurant he'd been told about. Paddington arrived first, and to pass the time he consulted his favourite book, the Duncan Hyde Good Food Guide. Mr. Hyde went around the country testing restaurants, awarding the ones he liked best special hats as prizes. The very best were given bowler hats, but as far as Paddington could make out, the present one didn't rate even so much as a cloth cap. All the same, his mouth was starting to water. And it began to water even more when he caught sight of the sweet trolley. The Browns were still nowhere in sight, so he came to a decision. It seemed much more sensible to wait for them inside the restaurant. "Bonjour, monsieur. May I be of assistance?" asked the waiter as Paddington drew near. "No, thank you," said Paddington sadly. "I was only looking. I think some of the sweets on that trolley might be worth a bowler in my food guide." To Paddington's surprise, his words seemed to have a magical effect on the waiter, and he immediately fetched the manager. "I can't tell you how delighted we are that you've honored us with a visit," he boomed. "You can't?" exclaimed Paddington in surprise. "Pray follow me," said the manager. "Thank you very much," said Paddington. "I've put you in a window, sir, so that everyone can see, so that you can see better. Now, may I find something to titillate your palate?" "Yes, please," said Paddington eagerly, "but I'm not sure if I can afford it." "My dear sir, we don't want to bother ourselves with mere money." "Don't we?" exclaimed Paddington. "Certainly not," said the manager. "Our chef is at your disposal. We want you to feel completely at home." "Oh, I do already," said Paddington. "When can I start? I'm hungry." "Well," said the manager, "I can recommend our avocado pear filled with sea-fresh prawns, or there's Dover fresh sole, farm fresh veal, oven fresh steak and kidney pudding." "I think I'd like to try some of each, please," Paddington announced rashly. "My palate's very titivated." "Some of each? I must say, sir, you take your job very seriously. Would you care to test one of our rare old wines as well?" Paddington considered the matter for a moment. "I think I'd sooner have some tin fresh cocoa," he said, "but not too hot, please. I'm having lunch with Mr. and Mrs. Brown at 1 o'clock. "Another lunch? Good gracious! I'd better leave you to your task, sir, but I do hope you'll see fit to mention us when the time comes." "Oh, yes," said Paddington happily. "I shall tell all my friends, just as soon as I've finished." "And what," asked Mrs. Brown, "are you doing, Paddington?" "We were expecting to find you outside," said Mr. Brown. "I wish you had," groaned Paddington. "Oh, I've eaten too much." "Paddington?" echoed the waiter. "Paddington? Do you mean to say? We thought you was Duncan Hyde, come to test our dishes for the guide." "By the look of the bill," said Mr. Brown, "he'll be testing the washing-up machine." "Gosh," said Jonathan, "it's over £17. There's £2 for a peach surprise," said Judy. "I've got another surprise," said Paddington unhappily. "I've only got 5 pence." I'm very sorry about this, began Mr. Brown. Sorry? Exclaimed the manager. We only opened 2 days ago, and look at the crowd. Half London must be queuing to get in. I wish we could have that young bear sitting in the window every day of the week. Even if we haven't been awarded a Duncan Hyde hat, he must be worth his weight in lobster souffle. Oh! Paddington let out a loud groan at the thought. Perhaps, he announced, you'd like to borrow my hat instead. I think I've gone off eating, so I shan't be needing it again for a day or two.